What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 61 of Sales Stories in Real Life. I'm your host, Alex Bruschi, and this is the show where professional salespeople share their stories about memorable buying experience. I've got my special Trailblazer sweater on today for today's special guest. We've got Jack Walter Funk on the show today. He is a Salesforce lifer and all-star ranger. Started as an intern, then got promoted to an SDR, promoted to a BDR, promoted to a small business AE, and now promoted to a growth business AE, where he and I are colleagues. Welcome to the show, Jack. Super,
Thank
super
you.
excited for this one. I hear you had, or rather you're having, a really interesting experience buying a car. What's going on there, Jack?
Yes, I am. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to talk about the plight I'm currently going through, and what I'm learning through the process. So I'm currently in the market for a new car. I'm currently a Denver resident and maybe moving a little bit outside of downtown Denver, and I'm looking at getting an SUV. So as a result, I started looking around and I was like, all right, I should test drive a few cars, figure out what I'm interested in. And as most people know, the car buying industry and just generally like car dealerships feels like a slimy, weird process, right? But I started calling around. I looked on cargurus.com and I'm like calling around to different dealerships. I set up a couple appointments to drive some cars. So this was 2 weekends ago, and I drove four different cars throughout the process. Some of them, it was really easy to schedule an appointment. Some of them, they had to get all this information from me. They had to do this, that, and the other thing. And then I show up and then they want to sit me at their desk and do all this stuff when really I'm just there as an information gathering process to see which of the four cars I like. Get through that weekend, narrow it down to two cars. And then I find those two cars and I bring my girlfriend with me to actually test drive with me because she may end up driving this car at some point. I want to make sure that it's something that she's happy with and we're both happy with together. And I scheduled two appointments. So I've got car one, it's a Chevy Tahoe that I drove, and then I've got car two, it's a Dodge Durango. So I called to schedule for the Chevy Tahoe, and I found one on the website that was the trim and what I wanted. Called the guy, and then I was like, "Hey, like I'm bringing my girlfriend. Is it all right if I bring her?" And then he was like, "Yeah, I mean, if we make a deal today and you want to take the car home, she can go home with you in the car." And I was like, I'm not a buyer until March. It was very clear about my timelines. I was like, I'm not a buyer until March. And he's like, all right, I'm in this office. So I show up to the office and it's a dealership and he's in the used car area. I go into the office. This guy's in the middle of eating lunch and he's like eating this like weird, huge salad. And he's like an older dude. And he's like, hey, you still want to drive the car? And I was like, yeah. And then he goes, well, it's actually on the showroom floor. I go, well, if I called you 3 hours ago and I told you I was going to come in and I wanted to drive that car, like, why can't I, like, why didn't you bring it out? Or why is it not, at least not on the showroom floor? And then he's like, well, if you're taking it home today, I could pull it out. And I was like, I'm not buying a car today. Like, I'm not a buyer today. And obviously, with a lot of these cars, they all have different engines and all these different things. And I wanted to drive that specific one because it had the engine. I was trying to see what it felt like. So I ended up driving something else, and I give him my proof of insurance and my driver's license. He goes inside. He comes back out. He doesn't say anything other than he just pulls the car out. I get in the front, and then he gets in shotgun and has my girlfriend sit in the back, which is like kind of odd. He doesn't say anything for the first like couple of minutes as we're pulling out the parking lot. He doesn't let us take it on the highway. We go literally around the block. Like we're in the car for maybe 3 minutes, pull it back in, and then he's asking me like one or two questions throughout. Like he's not saying anything. It's a pretty miserable experience. And so we eventually get back. I'm like, hey, if you give me your card, like if something comes up, I'll definitely give you a call if I'm interested in the car. And then at the end of that, I get back in the car with my girlfriend and I was like, that was the worst. Like he clearly, like in sales, it's important to qualify out. I'm a buyer. I'm gonna buy a car. And this guy just was like, oh, here's this kid coming up with his girlfriend just joyride my Chevy Tahoe, and he's not gonna buy it. And so then I was in a pretty bad mood. I threw away his card because I was like, I'm never gonna call this guy. This is the worst. And I go test drive car number two, which actually was a very easy conversation. The guy was texting with me. And even as he's like getting out the keys and stuff, he's still texting with me while he's in the dealership. He's like, hey, like pulling around the car now. Hey, come on outside. Much more like back and forth, right? Then we get in the Dodge Durango, driving it around. He's like, there's someone else that's trying to buy this car. We can just drive up to the mountains if you want to, right? Like you could drive anywhere. The longer we're away from the dealership, the more this other guy thinks that you're going to buy this car, even though I told him I still wasn't a buyer until March. This guy was telling me all about the car, all the features, all these bits and pieces. And I was like, sweet, this is actually an easier experience. Then he still wanted me to go inside and look at some paperwork and like look at the numbers. And I still have the 17 sheets of paper he printed out and makes he brings me over to his manager. He's like, talk to my manager. Like all these like sleazy-ish sales tactics that just make me be like, look, I still can't buy this car until March, right? I'm going to buy it in March. That's when my timeline is, but I can't do it now. My girlfriend's hungry. We're hungry. We're going to go get lunch. Like all we wanted to do was drive the car. Again, granted, he was much better. He let my girlfriend drive the car. It was a much better experience. But then I got home and I call my dad and I'm like, Dad, like just had two car test driving experiences, pretty miserable. And like he's like, yeah, the used car business is the worst. Like going to dealerships and haggling with them for $500 off your price, and then they try to give you all these extra fees. It's the worst. So he's like, I know someone that's an auto broker that you could call them, tell them exactly what you're looking for, and then they go find it. And then when they find it, they call you and say, this is the price. Do you want it? Yes or no? And you buy it. And so I called the auto broker guy, and there's this nicer older man. He's like, let me take a look in the market, see what's out there. He's already emailing me all this information, doing all this work for me. He's finding me the exact trim and color. And he's like, I can source this from West Virginia if you need to, right? There's so much more ease of the process that's built in that now I'm like, if and when I get this car, it's going to be through this auto broker guy and all the guys that I was working with the dealership. If they had been leading me to where I was trying to get to with the car, I would have been like, sweet, this is perfect. And again, part of the reason I was excited to get on this podcast, that's a very business to consumer buying motion. But I think there's a lot of practical ways that if you're a good B2B salesperson, you would care about these things. So that was my experience. Haven't gotten the car yet. When I get the car, I will 100% be posting it everywhere with excitement because it'll be my first car purchase I've ever made as an adult. But that's my in the process buying experience that I've had, Mr. Brewski. It's been rough.
JWF, the man himself. This is always fun because we've had other people come on and talk about buying cars, and a lot of whether it's buying a car or buying anything, it's like the same takeaways keep coming up every single time. And you and I talked about this a lot in pre-show, like just being easy to work with, like just being easy to deal with. I mean, that first experience, I mean, like you mentioned, where it's like you walk in and someone's eating lunch, like they knew you were going to show up, and it's like, okay, like you couldn't just like eat your lunch when you knew that I wasn't going to be there. And then it's like,
Right.
can my girlfriend come? Well, if you buy the car today, she can come. It's like, so what's like, I know that you talked about the frustration, but like we all know that the car industry kind of has that feel
Yeah.
to it, like you mentioned. When you were originally looking for a car, there are obviously like the Carvanas, right? And these other companies that are trying to pretty much remove car salespeople to take away
Yeah.
this experience. Did you ever consider that? Or were you kind of like, well, I'll give someone a chance first? Or what was kind of going through your head then?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that part of what I feel like a lot of consumers go through is like, and this is credit to my dad, John Funk, of like the research phase, right? Or filling out your data set of like what you're even really looking at. Of yeah, if I could show up to a dealership and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a car," and I had done that, like the car that I have right now, there was a moment where it was on its last legs, and I was like, I got to figure out something else. Thank goodness this auto shop like fixed it, and I thought I was completely done. Like it was so bad, the AAA guy laughed at me when I was like pulling the car up to get it like put on the tow truck. So I threw it in reverse and it rolled forward. He was like, "Your car's toast, man." But this auto shop, if I could shout them out, 5280 Motorsport in Denver, they saved my car. But when I was looking at different cars for that, I came in and I didn't have a vision. And that's when I feel like the salesperson starts to try to direct you to what your vision is of like, hey, I'm looking for an SUV. Okay, we're looking for a big one or a small one. Do you need a hybrid? Do you not need like an electric car? And some of these things, when you don't know your data set yet, you can get pushed into something that you don't really actually need, right? It's a classic sales car tactic that's like the swap. If you come in and you say, I want this car, and then they say, wait, we've actually got this other car that's totally different, but it's a car that you don't know that much about, but it's maybe cheaper or maybe they make more money on it. And it
Right.
becomes that process. And so with a Carvana or a CarMax, I was worried if I didn't come in with my vision that I was going to get stuck at the dealership for 3 hours driving 16 different cars when it wasn't what I was looking for. So I tried to refine my vision beforehand, but that's also something that like if you're the seller selling to someone and they don't have a vision, that's hard. It's hard to try to create that. But to discredit the first guy, I knew my vision. I called for a specific car. I said, I'm going to drive this. I want to drive this car. Here's why. Here's what else I've checked out. So I kind of was already further along in the process to know that, which to him should have been like buying signals. This guy is serious instead of, oh, I gotta take this car off the showroom floor just for this guy to drive it around and then say he wants to buy a Mustang instead. That wasn't where I was at. So that's kind of what my thought process was to try to do the research and fill out my data set before I really got there. And then when I got there, fill out the last 20% that I needed to be like, which car do I want? Do I want it to be red? Do I want it to be black? Like that type of thing.
That's such a great point that is so relevant to B2B selling and especially for us too in growth business is that like most of the times when buyers are coming to us, they're somewhere in the buyer's journey, right? It's
Yeah.
so rare that someone reaches out to you and they're at square zero, right? Maybe that's like outbound and you make a cold call, right? And they've never heard of you or your product, right? Then you're starting at zero and it's a pretty long process to go through the education and all that. Like you make a good point. Like you were maybe 80% of the way through, right? And there was that little bit of a gap where a salesperson can come in and be that expert and kind of guide you and make suggestions and maybe push back on certain things. It's funny
Yeah.
enough, we had someone on in a previous episode also from Denver who mentioned like, hey, in Denver, there's a lot of loose debris on the street. And so you should get windshield insurance, right? Because windshields break pretty frequently, right? So it gives
Yep.
this opportunity for the salesperson to come in and be that guide, but let you make the decisions. And so excuse me, we were talking about this pre-show and I'm really excited to get into it, is like this is so relevant to what you and I are doing every single day when it's like you shouldn't be selling two people the same. Like you shouldn't sell someone who's 30% of the way through the buying process the same as you would someone who's 80% of the way through, right? So like when you're working with customers, and again, we talked about this before, like what's your kind of thought process of like how do I assess where they're at in the buying process, right? Depending on where they're at in the buying process, like what are going to be some of the different steps that you're going to take?
Yeah. So I think that I've always operated on like a big acronym called KISS, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And I think that when you approach, and I think many Salesforce RVPs or AVPs would be like, I don't know why this guy's doing this. I do approach every customer the same. I don't really tier out my accounts. I could generally call out to say I feel like these two or three might go bigger than the rest this year. But if I approach everyone the same with the same level of care and the same level of you never know what's going to come out of this, you end up being a little bit more curious and caring about your whole book. Whereas I think some people will be like, it's a tier four account, no one's ever going to talk to them. Like they do whatever, their website's horrible, all that stuff. Like there was a customer that I had last year where the CFO just emailed me around their renewal. And I was like, oh, this doesn't look like that large of a company. I don't even know what they do. Come to find out, they supply a lot of the infrastructure for like Netflix, Tesla, Apple, like big Fortune 100 companies, and they work on these really large contracts and they kind of do like manufacturing and things like that. And so I get on the phone with them, and then the CFO is like, "We just want to learn how to use Salesforce better." And I'm like, "Okay, what does that mean? Right? How do I talk you through more of that?" Whereas if I had just sent them to the renewals manager to say, your renewals manager could talk to you, right? I was like, let me take a chance here and talk to them. And then that turned out to be one of my larger deals last year was because I took the time to say, What do you do? They actually had an initiative that they were working on that we actually were a perfect fit for, and I was able to align that to the value. So when I'm looking at my customers or how I'm trying to bring that to them, it is keeping it simple of like I'm going to approach them all the same, right? There's obviously different levels of preparation and care that I take into that, right? If I don't know anything about them, I'm going to come in pretty bare bones. But if I have large account plans, a lot of history, I'm going to try to read up on what the business does and what I can help with. And when you do that, that then keeps every door open as opposed to, oh, they don't know about this, or oh, I don't know if they're going to be able to get that or understand those things. And when you see like, all right, they're around their renewal or they want to talk about this new initiative they're working on, you can kind of guess the percentage of the way along that they are. And then I also would say that the percentage of the way along that they are is also dependent on who you're talking to. Like I was talking to the CFO. CFO is generally going to be 70% of the way along on everything. But if I come in and I try to be too much education,
Right.
like, look, I'm not the user. I don't really care about this. What we're trying to drive is this business process. Go talk to this other person who may be 30% of the way, and then I educate that person. But if you know your audience and you treat all of your customers with a similar care of like, I care about all of them. I love them all. And I want to make sure that they all feel that I'm never going to ignore them or not be there. That gives you a lot more, I guess, of a clearer vision of where they might be throughout the process.
Well said. I love that. Even though like folks, no, seriously, even though folks may be like inside of the same org, different people inside of the org may be at different places of the buying process, right? I mean, to your point, CFO, CTO, right? Maybe like a VP of ops, right? Like those people are probably going to be pretty tightly in the know and probably going to be some of the furthest along, but maybe you talk to a director level, even a manager level at some accounts, right? And those people are maybe the ones that need a lot more of that education when maybe like again a CFO is maybe looking at it more from like a holistic perspective or like an ROI perspective or like a major initiative perspective. So
Exactly.
I just love the idea of like everyone needs different things in the sales process, and obviously you've succeeded at this in a big way. You're a humble guy. You've had a lot of success at Salesforce, and I'm actually excited to talk about this. You've been promoted every single year you've been at the company, right? You're coming on 4 years now. Congrats to you on that in advance.
Thank you.
What advice would you give to the folks out there listening that maybe want to break into a Salesforce, or maybe even more importantly, like want to get promoted at their organization, right? Like they want to have these step ups that you've had, and for you, it's been every single year. What advice would you give to those folks?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. I would say that it's probably two pieces, and one of them being internally. So if you're already at your organization that you're at and you're trying to get promoted, internally you want to create demand for yourself. Be that through having a certain skill set, having certifications, having mentors or champions of yours that will put you in front of people that will make a difference. Like I've always found that even my previous managers, I really try to stay in touch with because you never know who your next manager will be. And having that consistent, what someone told me is like an army of like Jack Funk fans, right? There's like, you want to have a lot of people behind you that are like, every time I've talked to this guy, he's either been helpful, nice, maybe laugh, like heard good things. That is a really important piece of getting promoted. And Salesforce does a lot of your interview happens before your interview. As soon as you decide that you're like, I think I want to try to get promoted, then there's a lot of conversations that happen up until you do your interview. But your interview should be a foregone conclusion because they've already vetted you, you've already vetted them, you know what their process is, they know what your playbook is. All of that stuff is really important. And so I think when I talk to people that say, hey, I want to get promoted, I say, how many conversations have you had outside of just your manager that are for your promotion? And like someone I just talked to recently, I said two. I said, we got to bump those numbers up. You got to have like generally I would like talk to a manager, then I'd talk to three reps on the team, then talk to the manager again, ask the manager to introduce me to their VP, talk to the VP, then go back to the manager. That's seven conversations, right? And those seven conversations, everyone in those conversations knows that I'm interested in their business and you're asking about them and what they're trying to do. And when I was doing that at Salesforce through my different roles, that made it clear that I was an interested party and I was going to make sure that I made you know that I was interested and wanted to be a part of that. So that's piece one, is the internal piece of like creating that demand for yourself. Because yeah, there's lists of people that say this person could join this new role, but if no one's heard of you or hasn't talked to you, it's really hard for a VP or a hiring manager to just pull in a name, say, hey, this person's up next, unless there's a brand new team or this weird circumstance. And then the second piece that I would say is all throughout the process, you also have to be asking for the business, right? Like I think in sales, a lot of people are afraid to say, like, hey, I'm going to ask for you to close this. Like, if we're going to close this deal on Thursday, are you aligned with that? Who signs this? Like, are you guys on the same page as me? Because I want this now. Do you guys want this now? And you have to kind of ask for the business throughout the process of saying, this is the date when I could be eligible to get promoted. Is that when you guys have headcount? And continuing to repeat that thing, is there's so many hiring managers and things that they've got 13 different things that are flying around in their head. But if they can see that you can run a crisp process and then ask for the business at every step, that then puts you near the top in terms of what other people are doing in that process. So that's what I would encourage folks to do, whether you're at a Salesforce or a Google or a Microsoft or any other tech company. If you're in the B2B space, is create that demand for yourself with certifications, knowledge, recommendations, things like that. And then two, run it like it's a sales cycle so that they can see that you are a seller, and that when you close, you're going to close and you're not going to be like, hey, I'm done with my interview now. What'd you think? Right. But like, I would like to be on your team. Like August 1, is that like aligned with your goals? And that like kind of makes them wake up to be like, okay, guess this guy's serious.
That's such good advice, both pieces of it. I'm actually going to piggyback on the second thing that you said.
Yep.
You and I actually haven't spoke about this, but my manager and I still joke about this to this day. During my interview, I asked, "Do you have any hesitations moving me forward or something very similar to that?" Maybe 10 times, right? And for those that don't know, Salesforce does not allow feedback during the interview because they don't want any of the people who are interviewing to be biased. And
Yep.
so every time they would say something like, we can't answer, but appreciate the
Appreciate
question.
that.
And I would keep asking to the point where we were just all like cracking up. And so here's what I would piggyback on that is that not only, to your point, does it show that like you run a crisp process and you have the confidence to ask for the business, if you will, but it also gives that opportunity for that last objection to come out, right? Like maybe you don't ask that question and they had one concern left and they didn't get it out, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they can't give you the feedback of, hey, the interview is going great, but it does give them the opportunity to say, well, we're concerned about your background, or we're concerned that you're not close enough to the office, right? It gives
Yeah.
them that last chance to get it out, because one of the things that I learned from being in sales for a while is like avoiding those questions is worse than getting to tackle it head on, right? Like
Yeah.
you think like, ooh, let me just like skate by as long as I can without asking it, right? And maybe they're not thinking of it. They're thinking it too, right? Like don't get it twisted. They are thinking it in the back of their head too. Ask the question and kind of let them get that out. Sorry, I don't mean to steal your thunder there, but I'm really passionate
No,
about it. Um,
no, I'm
one more
glad to hear
question
that.
that one more question that I wanted to ask you promoted wise.
Yeah.
Not only obviously have you got promoted every year, but you did the promotion from SDR, BDR, but then more importantly, BDR to small business AE. And then from there, you got another promotion to growth business AE. What advice would you give out there to our SDRs that are listening of what would be some of the best ways to make yourself a promotion target to
Yeah.
AE? What's some of the best ways to make that transition, right? Setting a meeting versus asking for the DocuSign is a big step. What advice would
Yeah.
you give those folks?
I mean, there is some folks that would say that setting a cold call is probably harder than just sending the DocuSign, but I do hear what you're saying, and I think that there is a jump, but I think that part of what that is you have to find, similar to my previous advice around like creating demand for yourself, is like find an AE or two that you can kind of buddy up to and learn everything from, right? Whether that be the AEs that you're currently working with or folks that are a little bit older than you, folks that you see nearby in the office. I think especially when you're at a company that has more of a machine type process of this is the tenure you're in, do this, this, and this, and then your interview happens. You want to have a lot of people that are around the business that can say to a hiring manager, hey, look, I talk with this guy a lot. I think he's great. Like I can't tell you how many times I've had hiring managers ping me about a BDR or an SDR and say, hey, what do you think about this individual? And some people joke that I'm the mayor of the Denver office. I'd like to, sometimes I'm sitting at my desk, sometimes I'm like walking around the office and talking to people. But generally, I have a pretty good sense of who people are and what they're about. And if you're at a company that's like this and you have someone that can be your champion, that can be just a level or two up, I think that sometimes can make a big difference. And while I could tell you get really good at cold calling, have a really good tight mutual plan in your interview, things like that, showing you the ability to build a relationship interpersonally at your company that someone would vouch for you or even just put in a Slack message to say, hey, I like this guy or I like this gal. I think they do a good job. That's the thumb on the scale, right? Like everything that your SDR manager and your BDR manager is teaching you, listen to, right? They're going to teach you how to do the right things to get to the right spot in it. But the extracurriculars that you do outside of that, go buy three AEs coffee and really ask them pointed questions, not just how do I become an AE, but like what are the challenges you're currently facing this year? How does your territory look? What are you seeing in the business that you're excited about? When you ask those things and get them to talk about themselves, then they also feel like they had a good time talking to you and you're someone they would want to invest in, right? I think I mentor probably 5 to 7 SDRs to BDRs a year. And a lot of times I try to put that emphasis on them that it's a relationship game. And you could be the number one BDR, but if there's a BDR below you that people like working with a lot more, that has a really good reputation, that volunteers and is helpful and wants to run an enablement, but you're the lone wolf that's out there just crushing by themselves, a lot of hiring managers are going to hire the second rep that's going to actually provide that multiplier effect, right? And when you can say you're a multiplier, it's like hiring 2 people, 3 people, because instead of just hiring this lone wolf that does his own thing, you get someone that's going to be a impact driver for the team.
Great advice, dude. Great advice. I'm gonna like share this all across the team. Okay. We got a lot of B2B sellers listening, Jack. This has been fantastic. Covered a wide variety of topics here. So feel free to take this however way you want.
Yep.
For our folks that are still listening in, what would be the one big takeaway from this episode that you'd want them to take home?
I think that for if you're a B2B seller, you have to be the easiest vendor to work with. And I think that coming from a Salesforce, I try to hang my hat on that we're probably the most complicated product in their tech stack. We're probably the most complicated renewal sometimes that they're doing. We're the most complicated setup. You got companies like HubSpot and other people that you just set it and forget it, and you just set it up and you're good to go. Salesforce is complicated and it's a beast. But part of what I try to bring to my customers, I want to make it seem as simple and as easy as possible. And I want you to feel like I got you 80% of the way. And now all you have to do is validate that what I said was right. So if you said, I need to change this, 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 and that, and I can show you how you can change all those pieces with buying a new product, adding artificial intelligence to what you're doing. And then I can go back to you and say, you said to me, you have this. Does this solve that problem? And then if you say, yeah, and I say, all right, sweet. Can I get your business? Right? Is there anything that's in the way? Lead your customers to water and get them all the way up to the point where, similar to what you were telling me earlier, like put the cup of water in front of them and you're like, what would stop you from not doing this? And I think that when you get to that point, it feels a lot less scary when you're in a forecasting call or you're about to send the DocuSign because you feel like you're a lot further along. And I don't mean that this is you have to shorten your sales cycles and you have to do everything yourself and just kind of like force your way through the process. But I mean, like, do a lot of the research on the behalf of the customer. And then when you are on the call and you're asking them questions to say, like, why are you even doing this? Like, why are we talking? What happens if you don't change? You get them, that's a big 20% of the way question, right? If you say, like, if we don't change, we've got a leaky funnel and we're going to lose more customers, right? That gets them further along and you go, okay, well, these kind of tied it to the thing that we're really focusing on. And then you start to kind of get them closer and closer to the point where then you want to always make it seem like it's a no-brainer. And I go so far to break the fourth wall with my customers a lot of the time to say, at the beginning of the call, I say, I want you to feel like this is a no-brainer. By the end of the call, you say to me, Jack, why don't I have this already? And when you can kind of break the fourth wall and be super authentic with them to be like, I feel confident that this would add value. End of the call, I want you to feel the same. And if you don't, tell me why and make sure that I can fill that gap. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. But if I'm right, that's where then it's like you're at the water. Should we drink it together? Right? Do you want to do this? And then move forward. So that's what I would leave folks with is if you can think about it in that way of leading your customer there, educating them, being their partner, you'll find that then your customer will say, hey, will you come speak at our sales kickoff? Or hey, do you want to go get dinner with our CEO because they're in town? And you're in the family. You're a part of what they're doing as opposed to just, hey, this is the guy that I talk to every 12 months when my Salesforce contract is up. You know what I mean?
Dude, great advice. More fantastic advice. I remember one time I can't remember who exactly this was, but I'd heard something like, you want to be so valuable that like they would pay to talk to you, right? Like whether they're buying something or not, right? Like they think it's so valuable to talk to you that they would almost pay for those conversations. But right, it just happens to be that, you're solving a problem for them and selling something in the process. Oh man, dude, this has been a blast. Why don't you plug something before we jump? I know you're working on a bunch.
Um, well, I'm excited to appear on my second podcast. This has been a blast. Stay tuned on my LinkedIn to see if I do end up buying a car, a Dodge Durango. We'll see. I'm also going to plug the Denver Nuggets because I'm going to the Nuggets game later today. So shout out Denver Sports and shout out my two French Bulldogs. Vivian and Bronson. There's my plugs. I don't have anything else big that I'm working on, but when I do, I'll make sure I get back on here and I can plug it.
We're a very dog friendly show here. We are all for the dog shout outs. More importantly, go connect with Jack Walter Funk on LinkedIn. This has been an amazing episode. I know there is so much stuff that folks are going to learn from this one. Sales Stories in Real Life, fam. We will see you next week. Cheers.
Thanks.